I guess I'll go ahead and get started. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about moving from Drupal 7 to Backdrop CMS. So this is specifically for people who might already have Drupal 7 sites and are wondering what to do in the coming years with their current site. I am Jen Lampton. I am primarily a developer. I work with nonprofits, government agencies, higher educations, smaller businesses, essentially not the enterprise. I'm a one-person development company, and so that means I end up working a lot with in-house teams at various different places, and sometimes on smaller teams with myself and maybe several other contractors. So it's not the kind of place where Drupal 8 would be a perfect fit in a lot of instances, especially for nonprofits. They end up having lots of volunteers that they want to give tasks like updating the website. Same thing with educational institutions. There's often a lot of students available. And so you need to have a system that's ready enough to give to them to take over, that they don't need to have a lot of previous understanding of the platform, how to update. So I've spent a lot of time the past few years in Drupal trying to create that experience for people where when you log in, you don't have to know very much about Drupal. You can just do what you have to do. And so I'm going to talk a little bit from my experience in creating that for people. I'm assuming everybody here has probably heard of Backdrop CMS before, but if not, I'll just give you the quick elevator pitch. Backdrop CMS is essentially a modernized version of Drupal 7. It's a fork of the Drupal 7 project. So we took, well, it's actually really early version of Drupal 8, but back when it was nearly identical to Drupal 7 today. And we split it off and renamed it something else. So it's very, very similar to Drupal 7, but it includes a lot of the features that I think you couldn't have a new CMS today without. So some things that Drupal 8 includes too, like a built-in rich text editor configuration management system that allows you to have one live site and be working on development changes and deploy those changes without disrupting the content in your live database. That's something that people really love about Drupal. And it also includes a lot of the top features that were in Drupal 7. So just as Drupal 8 included things like CTools and views, Backdrop has that too. We've also included a ton more features. So there's actually 74 Drupal 7 contrib modules that have been included in Backdrop Core. Some of them have just been moved straight in, and some of them have been integrated more closely with the rest of the system. In general, we're trying to make a less complicated piece of software. So Backdrop should be easier to use than Drupal 7. It will sit somewhere between WordPress and Drupal 8 in terms of complexity, and it needs to be faster. So Backdrop is faster than Drupal 7 today, and we're going to keep working on making it faster with each release in the future. So that's something that we're pretty focused on changing about it. Backdrop is also focused on the experience of the people who have to use it. So rather than being really focused on making the APIs really great, we don't care so much about what developers have to do. We care more about what people who are using the software has to do. So from a user experience perspective, it should be a lot closer to WordPress in terms of your ability to just log in and do what you need to be able to do. So a lot of the features that we've been including in Backdrop are also features that were standard in WordPress that were missing from Drupal. So in case you're wondering who should move to Backdrop, if you're already on Drupal 7, that's easiest. If you're coming from Drupal 6, I've done a bunch of upgrades from 6 to Backdrop 2. You don't have to admit it out loud. It does still happen, and that's perfectly fine. To go from Drupal 6, you would just go to Drupal 7 first and then go to Backdrop. So the hardest part of that upgrade is 6 to 7, which is not super easy in the first place. If you're happy with your current website, so if you're not happy with your current website, you could build a brand new one and you could just do that on any platform. So there might not necessarily be a huge advantage in choosing Backdrop unless you needed the features that it provided, which I'm hoping to show you in a little bit. But if you have a Drupal 7 website that you are perfectly happy with, you want all the same features you have now, you want the software to continue to get updates, but you don't want to invest a lot of time or money into moving it onto a different platform, Backdrop might be a really great option for you because it's so similar to Drupal 7 to start with. So in general, upgrading to Backdrop can be done in 5 steps. The first thing you do is clean up your Drupal 7 site. And that usually includes removing, for example, modules that you've turned on but never used. If you have features on there that you built 5 years ago but have never actually used, you could turn those off. Just a general sort of overview, cleanup. What is it from the site that I want to carry on into the future? Once you have that ready, you can export your database and files from Drupal 7, set up a new Backdrop site, import your database and files from Drupal into Backdrop, and then run an update script. So Backdrop has an update script the same way that Drupal 6 upgrades into Drupal 7. Backdrop considers Drupal 7 its previous version. So when you drop your code in, it'll automatically be able to convert all of your Drupal 7 stuff to Backdrop for you. Before you start with the actual upgrade, I also recommend you do a lot of research. So I'm going to go through a couple of the steps that I usually follow before when I do an upgrade, and hopefully you guys will get a lot out of that. So let's see here. Too many browsers. Okay, can you guys see this? Yes. Okay. So what we're looking at right now is the website that I'm going to work on. This is a website that was built, I don't know, 8 years ago or something in Drupal 7. At the time, it was an e-commerce website. They raise fancy pigs in California for the purpose of being eaten for dinner. And at the time, there was a way that as a restaurant, you could go to their website and you could order your pork delivery direct from them. Since then, they've stopped using this e-commerce service. They've partnered with a larger agency that handles all of that for them. And so the website has been reduced to a much simpler set of what it was before. Today, it's more of a brochureware site, something that could be built pretty quickly and easy on any platform. But what I wanted to prove for this client was that moving from Drupal to Backdrop would be a more affordable option than anything else, because they already have a Drupal site and they can use it all again in Backdrop. So the cleanup step involved turning off all of the e-commerce stuff they weren't using, or removing the modules that had been turned off for years, and just making sure the site was clean and ready to go as it is. Part of my research phase, when I was trying to figure out what it would cost to get them to move, is I go through all of the modules that they have on their site, and I take a look at all of those that are available or ready for Backdrop, and I throw them all into this spreadsheet. And if you guys are interested in more of the details in this spreadsheet, it is linked from the session on the Stanford WebCamp page, so you can look at this later. You don't have to try and read it all now, tiny font. But essentially, there's just a list of all of the modules that they're using currently, the status in Backdrop, if it's been ported already, if it's included in core, if you don't need it anymore. What an alternate module might be. So if we use like node reference or entity reference in Drupal 7, you might want to switch to reference in Backdrop. Any of the steps that I think are required in part of the moving. So if we had to like uninstall a module from Drupal 7, that would be fine. If we had to test an upgrade because I wasn't sure it was going to work correctly, I'd note that in here too. And that would help me come up with an idea of how long I think it would take to do this upgrade. For more complicated websites, I also often will review the layouts in terms of what content is in position on which page, content types, and the amount of content in any given type. That'll give me an idea of what's most important for any given website. What are they actually using a lot of, and what are they not using so much of? I might document fields. This isn't actually from this website, it's just an example. So if I think there's something that might be problematic in a change, I would want to note that here and have some idea if I'm going to have to do any custom work on that or not. Usually you don't have to, and you'll see that in a minute. And then for the theme, also trying to get an idea of like how many template files or CSS files or JavaScript files do they have, just in terms of if I'm going to copy them over, how much testing am I going to have to do, how much find and replace am I going to have to do, just to give me a general idea. And for a very complicated website, I might also include a sitemap so I can keep track of which type of content appears on which pages or which layouts on which pages. Fortunately for you guys, most important thing here is the modules list. And I have been working on, find these tabs. Okay, I've been working on a module for Backdrop that's called, this one isn't it? It's this one. Oh man, I have the wrong tab. Okay, hold on. It's no. This is what happens. Let me try and do a live upgrade, admin modules. Okay, so this is my Drupal 7 site. of the Stone Valley Farm, the pig site, which is always good to, the pig site. This is the Drupal 7 version of it. If I go to the modules page, I have installed a module on my Drupal 7 site called Backdrop Upgrade Status. And this module will show us which modules from Drupal are available for Backdrop and what the current status of that module is. So there is a upgrade status module for Drupal that'll tell you if your Drupal 6 site is ready for Drupal 7, your Drupal 7 site is ready for Drupal 8, that sort of thing. This is exactly the same thing. We took that module and adapted it to work for Backdrop instead. So it'll tell you what modules you're currently running and if they're ready or not. And if you have one that doesn't have a stable release yet, it'll indicate that there's a version of it, but it doesn't have a version out yet. I'm in the process of updating this. Right now, it includes information about all of the modules that are in Backdrop Core, and will note if there's something that's missing from the Drupal version that got included in Backdrop Core. And if there's tricky things that need to be changed, those might be noted in here too. So here's like C tools, tells you what's included and what's not. But it's not done yet. It doesn't include, like, the module versions are obviously Drupal 7 numbers and not Backdrop numbers. So you gotta get those updated. But in general, it will really help you fill out your spreadsheet and let you know whether those columns need to be adjusted or not. And if you have a module that doesn't have a version yet, it'll have a big red line and say that it's not ready for Backdrop yet. So hopefully that'll help with that. I would also like to expand this module, and we were just talking about this week, to include some of the other statistics that I put into my spreadsheet. So it'll have like a tab for your content, and it'll tell you how much content you have in each type, what fields you have. If there's something that isn't going to upgrade smoothly, we'd have a place to document that in here too. So it will start to be a more complete report of how your site will translate into Backdrop. Oh geez, okay. All right, so here's my Drupal 7 site. So once I've got it ready, and in this case, this site is almost already ready because I've done a little cleanup on it before. What I would do is export the database to create a new Backdrop site, which I happen to have one right here. Import the Drupal 7 database, and then run this update script. And so what we're looking at right now, V2, is just Backdrop Core and all of the contributed modules, which is usually the first or second upgrade I'll do on a site. I might do Core by itself just to make sure nothing explodes. Then I'll do Core and the contrib modules is what we're gonna do right now, just to see what'll happen. So just by pointing my Backdrop site at a database that used to be Drupal 7, you can see that it recognizes it and tells you that there's 211 updates it needs to do. And that might sound like a really big number, but it really only takes a couple seconds, because most of what Backdrop does when it's doing that update isn't actually changing the database structure around. It's exporting configuration that was previously in the database and saving it as flat files, which is how Backdrop and Drupal 8 work with configuration. So the entire upgrade goes really fast. It just tells you what it's done here, and it gives you a chance to visit the site. So if I go ahead and, oh, I've got a login block right here. Login. Ooh. Sorry, I don't remember what my passwords are ever. The first thing you'll notice is that some of the configurations are missing. So for example, in the Drupal 7 site, which is over here, the way the site was built was using panels. So I have a couple pages like my home page, my recipes page, my blog page. These are all standalone panel pages. And then I have some other pages that are nodes, like the contact form, the about section. And so immediately after an initial upgrade, the configuration isn't going to be here for things that panels don't have an exact migration path from Drupal to Backdrop yet, although we are working on it. So the pages that are content are going to work just fine, but you'll notice the other ones are missing from the navigation. So usually after running the first upgrade, I'll log in and look around. I'll take a look at the list of content. This you guys will probably recognize from Drupal. Only difference is that this is a view now, so you can configure it however you want. The content editing experience is very similar to Drupal. We've got a couple of different changes, like the ability to like schedule things for the future. We include URL aliases and redirects if necessary. So it's just all the stuff you're used to. It's just more in Core than was there before. I'll take a look at it and make sure this is all working how I expect. I might check out, I don't know, are all my people there? Are all my taxonomy there? Things the way I expect. But anything that needs to be configured will need to be reconfigured. Anything like a panel will need to be reconfigured. Most of your module settings and stuff is all moved over. Views have all moved over. I don't think I have views. We do. Okay, so if you had any views in Drupal 7, they'll all come over as views in Backdrop. So that's one thing that's going to be a huge time saver if you had views configured before, which is nice. Once I'm sure all of everything that I want to be here is here, then I might spend some time working in things in Backdrop that are new. For example, our layout system. So this is something that's new for Backdrop. There are, rather than placing blocks into regions that are controlled by your theme, you place blocks into regions that are controlled by the layout system, and that makes it so that you can change your themes without needing to worry about breaking where your blocks might have been placed on your site. So a theme will work with all layouts, layouts will work with all themes, your block placements stay regardless of what's going on. So here, because I imported from a previous site, it's tried to figure out where to place all of the things that it had. Anything that doesn't exist in Backdrop but existed in Drupal 7 might not work, and it'll tell you it's broken and it'll tell you why, which is really nice. This is essentially the panels module from Drupal 7. It has drag and drop. We wrote an entirely new user interface for it, so it should be less confusing, but that's that. Let's see. So once I've got everything working, I'll spend some time setting up new layouts. So for example, my blog page and my recipes page were layouts. My home page was a layout. And once I've got it all working how I want, what I usually do is commit this in version control to my configuration directory. And I'll throw everything out and run the upgrade again at the end and do a config sync, and it'll pop all that stuff in. So you'll only ever need to configure anything once, and you can just import it again in the future. Things like if I had any custom modules, I might want to get my site all the way from Drupal 7 into Backdrop before I start working on the custom modules. Or if I want to update my theme, I would want to have my entire site and all of its configuration ready in Backdrop before I work on the theme. So any of that stuff I just do in, I don't know, I'll start with Bartik or something and then make my theme. And then when I do the final upgrade, I'll upgrade from my theme in the old site to my theme in the new site. So there's kind of an intermediary step here where everything is halfway done, and you spend some time clicking stuff together, and then when you're happy with it, you can do it again. So this snapshot we're looking at right here, I have a document. So many browser tabs, I'm sorry guys. Okay, I have a document that upgrades the entire process for this particular site. So if you want to see this in more detail, you can definitely look at it. It has some information about what goes into the spreadsheet and some resources for where to find them. On my local computer right here, I have 4 versions of the site set up. One of them is only core. One of them is core and contrib, which is the one we're looking at right now. One of them is a version of core and contrib with configuration. And then my last one is core and contrib and configuration and a theme. And the way that I do my data imports when I run them is I usually have a version of Drupal 7 with the theme disabled that I do before I have my custom theme. And then once my theme has been ported over, I'll do the final upgrade with everything enabled. So that was the Drupal 7 site in sort of the pristine state it was before I started. So I have lost my navigation here. Okay, so this is the version of Drupal core and all of its contributed projects. So if we went to the modules page, you could see things like address field and node reference, like modules that you, they're not all of these are in Backdrop core. These are ones that I've added. Once this upgrade works and I've got all of my configuration committed to code, I would do the same thing again. So I have an example here of Backdrop site plus modules plus configuration. And I'll show what happens, how you'd upgrade here. So do the same upgrade we did last time, but now that we have all of the configuration for the site, we're gonna do a config sync immediately afterwards. So I'll go back here and I'll log in again. And once you're logged in, you can go to the configuration management section. And here it'll show you, oh no. All right, hold on, time to go to the terminal. I don't know what's going on. Uh, okay, nothing. Oh, okay, sorry. Try this again. Hey, all right. So it's always good to make sure you do a Git pull before you try and do a live demo. Generally speaking. Okay, so if you go to the config sync page, it should show you all of the differences between the code that you're currently running and the code that you're about to pull in. So for example, on this site, I added a new layout for my blog, and it's got a configuration file here for it. Configuration files in Backdrop are in JSON, so they should be pretty clearly formatted. If you understand JSON, you'll know what you're looking at here. Lets you see a diff of changes. If I wanted to see like what I changed in my core set of variables, you could see like disabled CSS pre-processing. I've turned on the theme debug mode, and I've added, looks like a bunch of default settings that were only there for Backdrop. So you can review those if you want. In general, because I know I just made them, I'm gonna assume they're safe, and I will do an import here. And this will just take all of the configuration, apply it to the site, and run any necessary database updates. So if, for example, I changed a field, there are database tables that control your data for those fields. So the configuration is managed in a file, but it still needs to make changes to the database. So this synchronized step is really important for Backdrop to be able to handle that for you. Then once the sync is done, I can then go, oh wait, I'll flush my caches. I can flush my caches, and then I can go and check out the new pages on my site. So I now have a home page, I have a products page, I have a recipes page, which is new. I have a blog page, which is new. And all of my layouts are now in place. So if I go to the structure layout section, you can see I now have blog, home page, node override. On this particular site, there are a couple of blocks that are placed on individual node pages. So if you guys want to see that later, I can do that. But I want to do the last step, which is most exciting. So if you want to do, so after you have a theme, I have a version of that too. This is Drupal 7. Is this it? No, this is Drupal 7. This is it. Okay. So after you have a theme, you can run the same. Oh, geez. No, that was the opposite of what I wanted. This one I don't want. There's the other one. Okay. After you have a theme set up for your site, instead of showing up in Bartik, which is the default Drupal themes, also available in Backdrop if you're moving from Drupal, you can update to your theme too. So this is the Backdrop site with the Drupal 7 theme slightly modified. It looks very similar to it in Drupal 7. It has the who we are pages, the product pages, the recipes, layout with a view on it, a blog layout with a view on it, contact form, which is just a web form. This site has my images on it, which looks much nicer. There were a couple of things that were a little tricky that I wanted to spend some extra time testing, like my references. I wanted to make sure those worked correctly. I need to spend a little bit extra time making sure the views accordion upgraded appropriately. So I think that was on the our team page. There was a section here that's accordioned. So I actually ended up moving this site from Backdrop, from Drupal to Backdrop in less than a day. The majority of my time I spent in the theme because we have more modern markup in Backdrop. We're using more semantic markup with tags like header and footer and main, and I wanted to include those tags in the template files that I've used in Drupal. So I spent some time updating the template files to use the new syntax. I also spent some time changing some CSS modifiers, which maybe wasn't a good idea in hindsight because I had to update a lot of find and replace IDs with classes. Not required, but just bothered me, so I did anyway. So this site is now running Backdrop. It is Took less than a day to do it, so it was proved to myself that I could get them from Drupal 7 to Backdrop pretty easily. It had one custom module that was essentially a bunch of form alters that didn't need any changes. It had one module that needed to be ported. It was a taxonomy formatter module. All I had to do to get that working on Backdrop was change one line in the info file, and it had a theme that had all these changes. The majority of my time was spent updating the theme, which I think was probably 2 or 3 hours, and then running the update over and over again, which probably took another hour or so. Once you get into Backdrop, Backdrop does offer some new features. So you notice this little red dot on my admin bar here. It tells me there's something wrong with my site. One of them is access to update.php, which obviously I just ran the update, so that's why that's turned off. I would go and change that in my code and turn it back on. This other one, and this is a good example of a difference between the way Backdrop solves the same problems that Drupal solves. This is UTF-8 character support our emoji. So if you want emoji on your site, someone can be able to like copy paste one into a comment form. If you are running an old Drupal 7 site and you haven't updated your database, that would cause a problem. In Drupal 7, there is a solution to fix that, but it involves running a drush command. So it's sort of the solution to that problem is very developer focused. It's a terminal command that you run in order to fix it. But in Backdrop, we're more focused on making this a tool that's usable for people using the software. So rather than running a drush command, we give you a button in the user interface. So here there's just a button, it's baked in, you can say upgrade your database, and it'll switch all of those tables over for you. So we both had the same problem, but we solve them in very different ways because we're focused on a developer audience in the world of Drupal versus a sort of a more end user administrative audience for Backdrop. So this will take a minute. It's converting all of my tables for me, but hopefully it won't explode. Ta-da. Okay, so yeah, there's also, you probably will notice the administrative interface looks very similar to what was here before. It's a modified version of the Drupal 7 admin theme, so that we tried to make it be really familiar to people who already know Drupal, but be slightly more welcoming to people who don't know what Drupal is yet. So I moved my tabs down here, which is a little weird, but it's the same exact thing that you've seen and worked with before. So yeah, I don't know. It's all the same, but it's all different. So that's Backdrop. I don't know what time it is because I can't see because I'm presenting. How to get out of full screen view here.
It's 3:30.
3:30, perfect. Okay, so that leaves us some time for some questions, if anyone has anything. I can talk a little bit more about the changes that were made to the theme or the changes that were made to the modules, if you guys are interested in that. I could also do a little bit more on differences between Drupal and Backdrop.
Can you explain why you had to do it twice?
Well, so I actually did it 4 times. In this demo, I did it twice, mostly because if something goes wrong, I want to know exactly where it goes wrong. So when I do an upgrade, I'll do first just core to make sure that that works. And then I'll do core in all of the contrib projects to make sure that works. And so that's all of the stuff that's like not really my problem. If it breaks, it's not something that I wrote and I know that I've caused. So as long as that works, then I know that what's coming next is up to me. And so then I will do any of the custom stuff that I need to do and do it again at the very end, the actual whole upgrade. And the reason that at the very end you have to throw it all out and start over is because if you are adding update hooks, which I didn't actually need to do for this site, but for other sites, if you have custom modules and you need to change your data in any way from the old system to the new system, your update hooks might need to run between 2 of the other ones. So for example, one of the things we do in Backdrop is we store all of our like user roles in configuration files. In Drupal 7, they were in the database. So if you're running a change on your site that requires knowing those roles, you can't do a database query to get access to them anymore because they're now in configuration files. So you would want your upgrade hook to run before the hook that deleted those files from the database. And so that they have to go in a very specific order. So you have to run them all at once. And the system knows what order they need to be in. So if you do a piecemeal upgrade like I did, where I did first do core and then I do contrib and then I do my custom stuff, I'm changing that order and it might not work correctly. So in a rule of thumb, you need to do them all at once. But because I like to know if I did them all at once and it broke, I wouldn't know where it broke. I do it in pieces, but then at the end I throw it all out and do it all at once just to make sure that it all goes in the right order. It's a very long-winded answer to that question. I hope that makes sense. Okay,
I have lots of questions.
Sure, go ahead.
So does Backdrop have an e-commerce module?
It has a couple, just as Drupal has a couple. We have a copy of UberCart, so if you're running UberCart in Drupal 7, that'll upgrade smoothly. We have a couple of other ones like Basic Cart, I think is available. We also have modules that integrate directly with payment processors, like there's a Stripe module, so if you just had like a web form and wanted to take donations or something, that's pretty easy. We do not have a copy of Drupal Commerce, although someone's working on that. Ryan Serrano is one of the creators of Drupal Commerce, also started creating a project called Backshop, which was supposed to be a Backdrop specific version of Drupal Commerce. Drupal Commerce is a lot like Drupal 8 in that it is very powerful and very sophisticated and also very complicated. And so Ryan thought that there might be a better way to do that problem for the Backdrop landscape, that instead of involving a bunch of complexity and a bunch of different modules, would be a slimmed down version that included the most important stuff so that it wouldn't be so overwhelming for new people. So the new project called Backshop is not available yet. There's a GitHub repository where he's been working on it, but it could be interesting to see what happens to that in the future. So if you're coming from commerce in Drupal 7 and you're really happy with your commerce solution, it would probably be best for you to go to Drupal 8 because there is a solid upgrade path for that, and the kinds of features that you're getting now are going to be available in the future in 8, where they might not. You might be the only one if you chose Backdrop to be running a really complicated commerce site on a platform like Backdrop. It's possible, but I don't know.
But for UberCart, you're saying that does it have all those other? Because UberCart isn't just one module; it has all of these other kind of helper modules that.
Yep. Yeah. So there's lots of systems like that too. Like Webform has a bunch of different plug-on modules too. Like if you want a special kind of table clicker or whatever, like modules can have modules too, and that's totally fine. And the complexity isn't necessarily determined by the number of modules that are included in the package. It's more in the underlying architecture of the system itself. And Ryan was also involved in UberCart at the beginning, and he sort of re-architected the whole thing when he started working on Drupal Commerce with all the other, there's a lot of other people in both of them. I only know Ryan though. So he sort of had a chance to say, how could I do this in a way that would be more flexible, and landed on a tool that was more complicated. And so Backdrop is sort of, it's the same thing where it's like, okay, so you have, Drupal 6 was pretty simple, Drupal 7 was pretty complicated, Drupal 8 is very more complicated. Backdrop is sort of in the middle where it's like some of the things in Drupal 7 were already too complicated, so it took a step back. And some of the things that it needed to increase, or maybe not increase in complexity, but increase in feature set, it found a way to do without increasing the complexity. So UberCart is more in line with Backdrop in terms of philosophy, and that it was able to add all these features by including additional modules without including additional complexity. Whereas Drupal Commerce said, we can do this in a better way by making the system more complicated, but that had a cost in terms of how to set it up. Like it's very hard to figure out how to work with it once you know it. It's great, but just in that learning curve there is really steep. So Backdrop's sort of the same thing where it's like, let's cut out the learning curve and create a tool that's a better fit for more people rather than the perfect fit for people who are really good at understanding that exact thing. So it's sort of a philosophy thing too. I didn't talk very much about the Backdrop philosophy, but if you guys are interested, there's a page on backdropcms.org that talks about it. We have a set of guiding principles. One of them is making the software fast, as I did mention before. In order to make it fast, it needs to be less complicated. In order to be easier to use, it needs to be less complicated. In order to have more people contribute to it, it needs to be less complicated. So there's just a lot of things that drove us towards creating a simpler tool that were part of our guiding philosophy.
So we have about 9 minutes left if anyone else has a question.
I have a few. Can I jump in here?
Sure, yeah.
Hi, Jen. How are you? Hi. Three separate questions that I have. One is, so you said if you've got like a Drupal 6 site, because you know, who would still be running one of those? I'm assuming that you can use the migrate module and migrate to Drupal 7 and then just port over to Backdrop.
Yeah, you could. It really depends on, again, if you're really happy with what your Drupal 6 site is doing. The migrate module will not move any of your settings for you. So like your module configurations would all be lost, would only move your content. So if you want to build a new architecture around your existing content, migrate is a great way to do it. But if you have like a completed site in Drupal 6, I would actually recommend doing the Drupal 6 to Drupal 7 upgrade path, where you actually get to keep all of your content, or sorry, all of your configuration into your content. There are some sticky spots with that, but because the Drupal 6 to 7 upgrade path has been around long enough, there are a bunch of workarounds to that. I've done, all of my first upgrades to Backdrop were actually coming off of Drupal 6. There were people who skipped Drupal 7. And so I have a GitHub repository that includes like the most common things, like getting your rich text data into the right format, because the way we did things in Drupal 6 is different than the way we do things in Backdrop, like using figure text around your images and caption text and stuff like that. And so there's just some common things that work across all sites. And then there's some trickier things, like if you're using like the video module in Drupal 6, that would have to be moved to like a video field type in Drupal 7. And there are upgrade paths for whichever way you choose, but you have to kind of wrap your brain around what's different from how it was in 6 and 7. I think that's sometimes the hardest bit. So
yeah, you need to do that with migrate module anyways.
Yeah.
Because there's so much going on.
Yeah.
My second question, if I can continue to dominate the conversation, in terms of PHP version support. So I'm assuming that Backdrop is 7.2, 7.3 compatible?
Yeah, so every time there's a new version of PHP, the next release of Backdrop brings it up to date with the latest version of PHP.
Awesome. And then a more philosophical question, and I do appreciate it. I was looking at the philosophy page on the Backdrop CMS website. So the Drupal community is going to be supporting Drupal 7 through November of 2021, and some vendors have said they're going to support Drupal 7 through 2024. Tell me, this is another chance for an elevator pitch. Tell me why I would choose Backdrop over Drupal 7 if I'm looking for something that's supportable and easy to maintain, and that's familiar. I think is actually the adjective that I'm dealing with.
Yeah. So choosing it over starting a new site in Drupal 7.
Like let's say that I've got a Drupal 6 site that I want to replace with something that's familiar and supported. And I'm gonna put it in. My decision path is I'm gonna put it in Drupal 7 or I'm gonna put it in Backdrop. So tell me what the killer.
So Backdrop has a lot of different new features. Okay, so first of all, in terms of end of life, Backdrop version 1 is going to be supported until at least January 2024. So you won't need to worry about any upgrades at all until 2024. Backdrop itself also has a button that lets you upgrade core. So if you're worried about minor versions, that gets pretty easy. So let's see, available updates, settings. There's a status update. So if you want Backdrop to update itself, you now have the ability to like push a button on your site and it'll replace core and update core and run the update. So it was working a little bit more like WordPress. We haven't got this working for major versions yet, because we don't have a major version. We're only on Backdrop 1. But when Backdrop 2 comes out, we do want to make this button work there too. So rather than being the kind of thing where you have to worry about a old style upgrade where you have to copy your database into a new system or whatever, you should have a button to push to make the upgrade. So that'll be much easier. This site doesn't have any available updates, or I'd show you the button. But there is an option to do that here. So upgrading should be easy. We already feel like moving from Drupal to Backdrop is the hardest upgrade you should ever need to do. So we're going to focus on making that process. It's getting better every month. It gets easier. And because we're putting in backwards compatibility, so anytime we find something that isn't easy now, we try and build in something to make it easy in the future. And I don't know that if I have an example here. but in the log, if you call something that's deprecated, I don't think there's anything in here, it'll actually log a deprecated message in your watchdog log with a link to the API documentation that says why it's changed. So it'll still work, but then it'll try and help developers get to the next version. So rather than being broken and you have to go figure out why, it'll still work, and then it'll tell you why whatever's changed. And you can ignore it and your site will be perfectly fine. So if you're not a developer, it doesn't matter. But if you are and you want to get it up to the latest version, you'll have the ability to make that change too. In terms of why you might want to choose Backdrop over Drupal 7 to start with, it's faster. That's number one, so a good reason. It is responsive out of the box, so you don't have to worry about trying to figure out how to get a non-responsive system to be responsive using some kind of fancy base theme. It has a bunch of additional features. I personally think, as a developer, my favorite feature is configuration management. It makes it so easy for me to maintain existing sites and not have to worry about what state anything is in, and if I need to, ask my developers to, or ask my content editors to like freeze for a minute while I do something. It's much easier to manage. Just keeping config in Git also makes it easier for me to tell what's been changed and what hasn't. But there's a ton of other stuff too, and maybe I should show you on the Backdrop website under upgrading from Drupal 7. There's a list here of features added to core that includes 72 modules. So there's a bunch of stuff that as a Drupal 7 site owner would be your responsibility to keep up to date with what's going on in Contrib and make sure your site stays up to date. All of this stuff is in core now. So it'll all be included in your next core update, and you've got that button to push to bring your site up to date to get it. So it also should be easier to use. So if you're focused on content editors or volunteers working on your site and not wanting them to have a whole bunch of work in terms of learning on-ramp to get familiar with it, that might be a good reason. Also, as an architect, like if you're not a coder, but you're more advanced than someone who just logs and edit pages, if you're building the site, architecting the site, it's also a lot faster. So for example, if I was going to make a new content type, that's a good example. When I'm building a page, or I don't know, maybe not a page, whatever kind of content type it is, there's a bunch of stuff that we put all together. So just if you want to define like permissions, you do that on the page where you're creating content type. If you want to set the URL alias pattern, you do that on the place where you're creating a content type. All of the kinds of things that you used to have to bounce all over the navigation order get set up. Because it's all in core, we were able to integrate all of the configurations to a single place. So it makes it much faster to build that site in the first place than if you were to build it on Drupal 7. Another reason is just having a rich text editor you don't have to fight with. It's already all set up. It's got some good buttons on it. I don't know how this site was set up in Drupal 7. We can take a look at it. So here's the CK editor options. There's sort of limited options on this site, but we could, add people to embed an image. The image uploading, you could also upload PDFs directly in the rich text editor. Image uploading, you can do like copy paste to put images in there. That's something that's hard to do in Drupal. It works even from a phone. Like if you click the image upload button, it'll open your camera so you can, post an image, write a blog post while you're on the road. Yeah, I just find it takes a lot less time to administer a Backdrop site than a Drupal site. Just bouncing around the image interface in terms of the amount of work you have to do to keep it up to date, that sort of thing.
Thank you. Those are my questions. There are some in the chat as well. If other people want to jump on.
I'll bite.
Sure.
Thinking about our internal Stanford standards for information security, something that has the tag beta designation may not be considered, like it wouldn't meet the Drupal 7 security standards for community support, right? So I was wondering if there was any conversation around developing a standard for moving something along to 1x and giving a little green check mark according to some sort of core principles.
Yeah, so we, I don't know that we had much of a conversation around this. It just kind of happened initially. But because all of our development is happening on GitHub, we're using semantic versioning, and has to be like a special integration between our GitHub system and our website in order to get modules to appear up on the website. So we had sort of a big thought about how is a developer going to indicate when this module is ready to show up, for everyone to use it. And Backdrop also has an additional feature on the modules page, the installer module to turn on. It provides a user interface that lets people install modules. And so because we have an interface here that lets you pull a module in from anywhere without needing to leave your website, that sort of assumes a specific, like, you don't want to give somebody a button to install their module that's going to break their site if they're not capable of like getting access to the files and removing them. For example, they might not have FTP access to the site, but they can still install a module using this button. So you don't want to give them something that's broken. So that means that in order for a module to appear in this list, it needs to be stable, which means it needs to be a 1.x or 2.x or whatever. It can't be an alpha or beta release. In order for them to be on this page, they're the same ones that have to appear on our module list on the website. And so if you want your site, your module to appear on backdropcms.org, it has to be a stable release. If it's not a stable release, you can be in GitHub forever, but it won't show up here. So there's sort of an incentive there for like, you want to make sure your module is stable enough that someone can install it without needing access to the code. And as soon as it reaches that benchmark, you're going to want it to have that version number on it. So it sort of happened naturally that, also having the extra bug fix release version that you can have a 1.0 for forever. 1.0.15 is what Backdrop and Migrate is on right now. So there's been 15 releases of 1.0. So I think it gives developers a little bit more confidence in terms of I can release a 1.0 and can still make bug fixes all the time. So it came out that way. There's nothing on here, dev, beta, alpha. It won't show up on the site if it's labeled that way.
Thank you.
Sure.
So we're at,
And I know that we have very little time. I wanted to hear if you have any, high-level thoughts on how to deal with sites that Drupal 7 have a lot of workflows. The other day on our mailing list, Vanessa shared one website that belongs definitely to that category.
What do you mean by workflows?
Like if the site has a lot of rules with email notifications or some actions happening based on what is, what a user does, which are kind of more functional websites, like processing applications, sending notifications, changing status of something.
Yeah, I mean, if it's doing it in Drupal 7, it can do it in Backdrop too. Without any like specific examples, it's hard to say, but like we have a copy of rules module. So if your site depended on that, it can do that. Our site runs cron in the same way that Drupal 7 does. It actually runs it more frequently because we have this automatic publishing feature built in. So it has to run it every 5 minutes, I think, in order to do that. So yeah, anything that was based on like the cron system or workflow system would work the same way in Backdrop as it did in Drupal 7.
Thanks.
so it's 3:50. I think we should wrap it up. We want to thank you very much. This was an excellent presentation. So.
Hey folks, you can all come off mute and applaud Jen. Thanks, Jen. It's great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.